Imagine discovering that a stranger has been living in your home, secretly sharing your space without your knowledge. It sounds like the plot straight out of a horror movie, but this chilling scenario is actually real, and it's called phrogging. Hello and welcome back to Weirded Out. Today we're starting a new series on the channel which is gonna be called Weird Wednesdays, and in this series I'm gonna cover a lot of different things apart from true crime. So dark stories, conspiracies, mysteries, anything else that is not true crime related, but also on the weird side. So if you have any suggestions of what you would like me to cover on Wednesdays, feel free to comment below. But if you also like true crime, I try to upload a true crime deep dive every Sunday. And if you like all that stuff, then subscribe and also follow me on Spotify so you never miss an episode. So let's get going into the terrifying world of phrogging. Okay, so please ignore the fact that I look completely different from the start of the video. I recorded this entire episode and the audio just didn't work. So I'm here again and we're getting started. So the word phrogging has actually only existed since 2014, but the practice is likely as old as homes themselves. And the word comes from the idea of phroggers being like frogs, so jumping from place to place. So phroggers jump from home to home. And maybe you are already very confused, but wait, okay, I'll make it make sense. So phroggers basically live in already occupied houses. And what they will do is they will hide in basements or attics and just staying there, living there for a while, and they will often just move out before they get caught. And maybe you've heard the name squatter before, and you might be thinking that this is the exact same thing, but it's actually not. It's quite different. Well, squatters, they usually will live in vacant buildings. Those buildings are most of the time already owned, but there's nobody there. Maybe they are on holidays, or maybe they just abandoned the place. But the squatters will move in there with the intent of gaining permanent residence there. So basically they will try to get ownership of the property through adverse possession. Now, as you can imagine, both squatting and phrogging are illegal and can, lead to criminal charges. But that doesn't stop a very big community of people who basically do this for a living. And while for the phroggers it might be just fun and something to get their edge off or some adventure, the victims of phrogging are often left really paranoid and worried that something is not right. There are a lot of people who have reported thinking that someone is living in their attic or basement because they feel a few different weird things going on in their house. So maybe some objects are moved around, or they feel like they're being watched while they're sleeping. There was even this TikTok video that showed up on my For You page. Is this woman that she just brought her kids to school, and when she came back she found that things were really strange and out of place in her house, and she knew that they weren't that way before she left. She's freaking out because she completely believes that someone is living in her attic.
Listen to me, I'm so serious. I just got back from dropping people off and taking people to school and shit. What is this on my floor? Because it wasn't here when I left and ain't nobody here. I always thought that it was somebody living in the fucking basement, bitch. But what you're not gonna do is leave a mess. And also you need to start paying some rent.
And her family and friends and even some people in the comments think that she's completely paranoid. But honestly, I understand, because I would feel the same way if I noticed something is wrong at my house. It's your house, you know it, and you have to trust your gut feeling sometimes. There was even this guy in Japan in 2008 who managed to catch a phrogger in his security camera footage. So he installed security cameras all around his house because he started, like I said, feeling that things were not normal, that things were out of place and something was weird, and he totally believed that someone was living in his attic. So what happens is that he literally caught someone coming down from the attic And the woman just was living there for over a year. And she even goes on to eat his food, and she even pees in his sink. It's very creepy.
So I kept on finding food missing in my apartment that I knew I wasn't eating. I confronted my girlfriend who lives with me about it, and she claimed she wasn't eating it. So I decided I'm going to set up a video camera and I'm going to catch her. This is what I found.
But something that I kept asking myself while researching this is, what is the point? Why do people do this? Because you can kind of understand why people do squatting, okay? They are trying to gain the ownership of the property. It's wrong, but you understand the reasoning behind it. But for phrogging, it's a completely different thing. And there are many different situations and reasonings behind it. Sometimes people just simply want to do this out of, feeling some excitement and adventure of going and living in someone's house without them knowing. And some people even do it as a challenge. And there are even forums and, groups of people who practice this, and they help each other to find the best locations, and they tell them what house they should go next. But there are also some really terrifying motives. There are some people who do this because they want to cause harm to the people living in that house. And as you see in the true stories I'm about to share, it is a very traumatizing experience. So the first story happened in 2019. A couple, James and Brittany Campbell, had just recently moved to Honolulu, Hawaii, and they were very excited to start a new life with their family. They had 2 children, and Hawaii, it's a paradise, so that's the dream life for them. But they weren't expecting at all what was about to happen. Almost immediately they started noticing that things were wrong, that maybe there was something going on in that house that was not normal. Brittany would find things around the house that weren't there. She found misplaced boxes, and she even notices that one of the webcams from her computers that she turned on every single day kept turning itself back on every night. And one night she even heard doors slamming. But the husband, James, thought that she was overreacting and that maybe it was just the stress of the move getting to her head, and there was nothing to worry about. But soon James would start realizing that his wife was not overreacting, and they were actually going through something absolutely insane. So one day he sees this shadowy figure outside from the window, and when he looks away, and looks back out, the figure is gone. But it doesn't stop there. After this, he finds a creepy message on their desk calendar that said, "Your rehabilitation starts today. Do as I did. Choose a house, clean it, set up all devices." Sounds extremely creepy, right? Like I would move out straight away. But James still didn't believe 100% that there was something wrong going on in the house. He just thought that this message was a message from his wife, Brittany, trying to tell him to clean more or do more chores, which makes no sense, but okay. Now, while all of this is going on, they're just living their life in the house. But in September of 2019, they actually travel to the mainland with their kids. And when they come back, that's when reality hits them. They straight away see James's bike parked in front of the house, and it wasn't there. It was actually locked in the garage. So how did it get there? So with all the kids still in the car, James gets out and opens the garage, and he sees it completely trashed. And when he tried to open the door to the house, it wasn't budging. It was like something was behind it, blocking him from opening the door. And, well, no big deal. It was just a guy, an actual man holding the door and keeping him from opening the door to his own house. So James kind of stopped for a second when he noticed there was a person in his house, and he looked through the door and he saw that a man was standing there, and he was extremely calm and told him, "This is not your house." But James managed to get inside, and the guy that was there was literally wearing all of his clothes. Their pet cat was locked in a cage, and he looked like terrified and thirsty. And that's not even the worst part. They noticed that that guy seemed to be making a sort of inventory of all their stuff. So of course they thought, this is absolutely insane. This is so creepy. So they called the police. And when they get there, they identify the guy as Ezekiel Zayas. And it looked like he had turned their home into a creepy lab. So the police starts investigating around the house to understand why that guy was there, what was his motive, and they look through their family's computer and they find a document with writings that said, "The Omnivore Trials, a rehabilitation for rat-like people." So of course they have no idea what that means, but they're about to find out. And they also find some writings about like details, intimate details about the Campbells and their life, things that they never would tell anyone. So basically that guy was hearing their conversations, and he was just living in their house this whole time, listening to every single thing that they were saying. He even listened to conversations between Brittany and James about how they wanted to have another baby. And he wrote that Brittany should stop trying to have babies and should just start trying to take better care of the ones she already had. And something else they found in those weird documents he wrote is that he said he wanted to make them into perfect people. They even found a browser's history of this guy searching for videos on how to surgically remove an arm and how to do gender reassignment surgery. So he basically wanted to do something creepy and play doctor on them and perform surgery on them. Now, needless to say, after all of this, the Campbells were absolutely horrified and traumatized, so they packed their stuff and moved out of Hawaii. And of course, Zayas was arrested, but he was quickly granted supervised leave from the prison. But he ended up in prison again just a few months later, and he was then charged with murdering one of his inmates. So yeah, I don't know, I'm just glad that they were able to call the police and that, I don't know, that guy didn't actually manage to go through whatever his creepy plans were. And the next story, well, it is a lot. In 2012, a woman named Tracy started hearing some weird banging noises coming from her attic. Now, she first had a very logical thought. She believed that it was maybe a wild animal that managed to get inside her house and it was stuck in the attic. Because, you know, honestly, what else was she gonna think this is? A ghost? A monster? an ex-boyfriend? Well, her son and her nephew end up, getting the courage to go up to the attic and check what was going on. And what they found was definitely not an animal. It was honestly worse. They were faced with a 44-year-old man, and it wasn't just any man, it was actually Tracy's ex-boyfriend. Now you might be thinking, okay, maybe they broke up recently and he is upset or still obsessed and he's living in her attic. That's already bad enough, right? But no, they didn't break up recently. They broke up 12 years before this. And the last time that Tracy had saw this man was 1 year before she found him in the attic, and it was only because she paid him to do some work for her. But after he'd done that, he ended up in prison because of a few different crimes, and one of them including robbing Tracy's truck. But when he was in prison, he was sending Tracy a lot of different letters because he was still in love with her after 12 years. But Tracy didn't want it, so she didn't even respond. So when he gets out of prison, his amazing choice is to go into her attic and just live there. Talk about not being able to move on. So of course, Tracy calls the police, but before they are able to grab him, he managed to escape. But he left cups of feces and urine in the attic. And even worse, the only way to the attic was through a hallway that connected Tracy's children's rooms. So he had to get into their rooms to get to the attic. So imagine how close he was to where her kids were sleeping. I mean, that's a mother's worst nightmare, right? Thankfully, Tracy was left unharmed and her kids, but still, this just shows how creepy this whole thing is, and sometimes your ex-boyfriend is worse than a ghost. Now for the next story, I left this one for last because it is very upsetting. So trigger warnings for this story: there are content of murder and sexual assault. So it all started in Pepperell, Massachusetts, when teenager Tina Bowen started to feel like something was wrong in her house. She found creepy messages all over her walls that were written with ketchup in an attempt to look like blood, and those were really threatening messages. She started to think that her house was haunted and that maybe even her deceased mom was trying to send her a message. She also noticed that stuff kept being moved around and bottles of alcohol were suddenly empty. But on December 8th of 1986, she would soon realize that it was not supernatural at all. It was actually very real. Tina and her father came home to find the most terrifying thing anyone could find at their house: a person. They found this guy dressed in a really creepy face paint, a mask, and he was holding a hatchet while hiding in the closet. He then forced her and her dad into a bedroom before, for some reason, running off into another part of the house. And Tina used that to her advantage. She managed to escape and call the police. And when the police arrived, they found out that the stranger wasn't just a random intruder. It was actually a guy named Daniel LaPlante, who was also Tina's ex-boyfriend. What's up with ex-boyfriends being obsessed with people and living in their house? Seriously. And they just found out that he had been living in their crawl space for weeks. There is a police sketch that you can see Daniel LaPlante's hiding place while he was frogging in the Bowen's home, and it's actually so creepy to see where he was in. It's like literally inside the walls of the house. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end here. He doesn't just get caught and it's a happy ending. He does get arrested, but he gets out on bail, and while out, he decides to target another home. And in November of 1987, he frogs at a teacher's house, Priscilla Gustafson, and her 2 children. And his initial idea was to just live there for a while, because Priscilla was actually away. So he thought, no problem, I'm just gonna live in this woman's house for a while and then maybe steal some of her things before she comes back. But Priscilla and her son end up returning home early, and then the situation escalates tragically. When Daniel realized that Priscilla was home, he first considered jumping out of the window and escaping, but instead he decided it would be a better idea to confront her and her son. So he aimed a firearm at Priscilla and her 5-year-old son William, then led them into a bedroom. He then proceeded to sexually assault Priscilla, then later shooting her twice in the head. He then takes William into a bathroom and drowns him. But unfortunately, it doesn't end here. While Daniel was about to leave the house, Priscilla's 7-year-old daughter Abigail comes home, and instead of just letting her go and escaping, he decides to take her into the bathroom and also drown her. And thankfully, later that evening, officers were able to find him hiding in a trash can nearby. So they take him into custody and he ends up confessing, and he was then arrested and sentenced to 3 life sentences. Now, these stories are all very extreme cases of phrogging that happened. This doesn't happen all the time. It is rare, but still, the fact that this is possible with someone just living in your house, it's absolutely terrifying. And while some people may think as phrogging of something fun that they do to get their edge off, it's definitely not fun at all, especially for the people living at the house who are actually suffering from this. Now, there are a lot of other different phrogging cases that are absolutely insane, but I would recommend watching the documentary Phrogging Hider in My House, where people share their experiences with phroggers, and it's actually insane. I was paranoid for ages after watching this because I keep believing that someone is living in my house, even though I don't even have a basement or an attic, but you know. And those stories just reinforce that if you feel that something is wrong in her house, it probably is. So do something about it. Set up a camera, call the police, because don't wait until someone comes out and tries to do surgery on you. But anyways, thank you for spending your time with me and listening to this episode. Let me know what weird subjects you'd like me to cover for the next Weird Wednesday. And also don't forget, there will be another true crime case this Sunday. So see you guys next week and bye!